All right, good morning, everybody. It is 11 o'clock at our scheduled starting time, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. I do see that there are more folks coming in, but Michelle Carnes will admit them and be handling things behind the scene here. Thank you all for joining us today as we discuss America's Infrastructure Report Card and how we can raise the grades. Thank you so much to the American Association of Port Authorities and the American Society of Civil Engineers for co-hosting this panel along with the U.S. Committee on the Marine Transportation System. This panel discussion is being recorded and will be uploaded to the CMTS website within a few business days. So feel free to check that out and share it with your colleagues who weren't able to join us today. I'm Brian Tetro. I'm the acting director of the Committee on the Marine Transportation System on assignment, permanent assignment from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For those that aren't familiar with CMTS, I'll give a little bit of background about what we are and what we do. The CMTS was established by presidential directive in 2004, chartered in 2005, and then established by statute in 2012. The CMTS is a Maritime Policy Coordinating Committee chaired at the cabinet level by the Secretary of Transportation, and much of the day-to-day direction comes from a sub-cabinet coordinating board. A little plug here for those from federal agencies. The coordinating board meeting is the 27th of July. Looking forward to seeing the principal attendees there, and please reach out to us if you need more information about that. The chair of the coordinating board rotates yearly between the secretaries of Transportation, Defense, Commerce, and Homeland Security. The current chair is the Department of Defense, with the Army Corps of Engineers chairing the coordinating board. The CMTS has multiple teams to carry out its work. And today's panel is brought to you by the CMTS Supply Chain and Infrastructure Integrated Action Team, or IAT. More information can be found at our website, cmts.gov. I'd like to pass the mic over to Carrie to tell us a little bit about the American Association of Port Authorities. So, Carrie, you there?
Ryan, thanks so much. Is my audio okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great, thank you. So, Brian, thank you and the CMTS and all of your government colleagues for your service and everything you do on behalf of the maritime supply chain. I'm Carrie Davis, Vice President and General Counsel of the American Association of Port Authorities. Our Washington, D.C. based trade association has been around 112 years, and we represent 123 deep draft seaports across the Western Hemisphere. We focus especially on about 82 United States ports because we advocate for their interests in Washington, D.C. AAPA applauds the federal government's work in maritime supply chain because maritime and freight infrastructure spending has really taken major leaps forward, going back about 4 Congresses ever since the passage of the FAST Act. Let's look at some of the downstream impacts. The last CMTS study on this topic, and I really see CMTS as a powerhouse of content and information on the importance of the maritime transport system. The last study in 2020, CMTS found that increases in infrastructure spending boost GDP, increase real disposable income by as much as $353 per household, and creates economy-wide returns of $2 or $3 for every dollar spent on the system. So I don't know about all of you, but $353 means a lot for my family as Prime Day is coming up, because I'm sure you're all tracking what's in your virtual shopping carts for Prime Day. These types of talking points and data that the CMTS helps gives us are exactly the case that we make to lawmakers day in and day out in Washington, D.C. to help keep the support flowing for the maritime supply chain. We're glad also to work with ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, you're going to hear from today, to reinforce and beef up our case with numbers that might be simpler and easier to digest for people that don't work in transport, distribution, logistics, and infrastructure day in and day out. The letter grades that ASCE gives in their every 2-year report card are just like the ones we received in school. They're a really genius, simple, and elegant way to tell the story of federal infrastructure investment. And guess what? The grade for ports is getting better. You know, I was a pretty earnest kid in school. Some might say I was even pretty nerdy. So I always strived for A and B grades, and I always kind of averaged around the A's. Even though I was kind of nerdy, I had a little bit of a class clown streak to me, and I would goof off a bit because I always got that thrill of making my friends laugh. So I learned really quick from the adults that grades aren't enough. A's, high B's, that's not enough, especially if you're the one distracting the others in the class or pulling down their grades. Why do I mention any of this? It's because I see some parallels with maritime infrastructure right now and the coordination between the private and public sector, or you might think of the two peers sitting next to each other in class, private and public sectors. The grades are getting better for ports because the full use of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, a mainstay of funding waterside infrastructure at ports, as well as the majorly boosted supplemental funding for landside infrastructure in and around ports. That's why the grades are going up, and it's wonderful, and it's hopeful, and it's going to lead to all of the wonderful projects that you're going to hear about today. But we also need the right comportment between private industry, i.e. the port authorities, and our friends and classmates in the grant and project administrators in government. Why do I mention all this? The time is too long and arduous for getting grants or projects to be awarded, bidded, project agreements to get hammered out, then funded, and then all the reporting that comes along the way of the project. Sometimes it seems like the permitting and project delivery process is better for lawyers than it is for American workers. And that's why I'm leaving you with this final thought. I'm leaving you with a two-part call to action. A, be outstanding partners between private sector and government when it comes to honoring each other's roles. Ports want to build things and move things. Public officials want to fund game-changing projects, and they want to ensure oversight over the public's money. These should not be adversarial. They're both noble goals, and they've got to work together. And here's B, the second part of my call to action. Let's keep getting after some policy improvements to reduce red tape and to make both sides, both peers' jobs a little easier when it comes to reducing the number of years it takes to permit a project, reducing the litigation around a project, or reducing the number of signatures needed on a document, all for the purpose of increasing the number of American jobs supported by these projects. You can use hashtag Permit America to Build on socials to advance a lot of what I'm talking about. And you can ask your member of Congress to pass the Port Infrastructure Permitting Empowerment Act. We have information on AAPA's website about this piece of legislation that's going to do a lot of what I'm talking about. I'm stoked to learn from the panelists about innovative projects being built all around the country, in New Orleans, in Virginia, in Miami, and beyond. And AAPA is grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry, for that kind of rousing call to action. I really appreciate that, kind of laying the groundwork for hopefully what we're going to hear from our panelists, and then the discussion and questions that we'll get from our attendees afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'll introduce our panelists. I'll read a biography for each of our three panelists and then turn it over to them to give a presentation. That will have their three presentations or discuss what they want to speak about, and then we'll open it up to questions. So looking forward to, as I say, a really good sharing of information and then discussion afterwards, how we can move forward. So first off, our first presenter will be Norma Jean Mattei, who's a professor and past chair at the University of New Orleans Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. She's been there since 1995, and she's been active in ASCE for more than 20 years, locally, regionally, and nationally in leadership roles at all levels. She was elected the Society's membership, elected by the Society's membership as the 2017 ASCE president. In 2012, Ms. Matai was one of 3 civilian members named to the Mississippi River Commission, which researches and provides policy and work recommendations covering flood control, navigation, and environmental projects for the Mississippi River Basin. The governor of Louisiana has appointed her to the state's licensing board for professional engineers, known as LAPLs. She also serves on the board of directors for both the Louisiana Transportation Research Center Foundation and the Louisiana Technology Council. Norma Jean's technical research interests include large watershed management, material and structural testing, sustainable reuse of spent construction and fabrication materials, and residual stress measurement. She earned her bachelor's degree in civil engineering in 1982 and a doctorate in 1994, both from Tulane University. Our second presenter will be Kathy J. Vick. She's the Chief Development and Public Affairs Officer for the Virginia Port Authority, where she oversees development, government and community relations, sustainability, and the Maritime Incident and Emergency Response Team for the 3rd largest port on the U.S. East Coast. Before accepting a role at the port, Kathy served as Deputy Director for Energy Policy for the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. There, she helped to implement energy policy initiatives for the Commonwealth of Virginia. She also worked as Director of Government Relations for Virginia Natural Gas, where responsibilities included advocacy to state, local, and federal officials, guiding the company's civic and charitable sponsorships and donations, and managing its conservation programs. Kathy has a law degree from Georgia State University College of Law, a master's degree in business administration from College of William and Mary, and a bachelor's degree in political science and communications from James Madison University. She's also a 2005 fellow of the Sorensen Institute of Political Leadership, 2009 graduate of Lead Hampton Roads, 2015 graduate of Lead Virginia, and 2019 graduate of AAPA's PPM program. And our third presenter will be Helga Sommer. She has more than 24 years of engineering experience working in both the public and private sectors. Helga is currently the Chief Port Engineer at Port Miami, coordinating a diverse team of engineers, managers, consultants, and project control specialists to deliver an aggressive program of capital improvements. Her team is currently working on projects that include cruise terminal construction and upgrades for multiple stakeholders, cargo yard improvements, major roadway projects, replacement, realignment, and improvement of bulkheads, shore power, and numerous ancillary infrastructure improvements. Additionally, her team manages all project control functions for capital developments program valued at approximately $3 billion. Helga graduated from the University of Miami in 2001 with a master's in civil engineering, structural focus, a bachelor's in civil engineering, and a bachelor's in architectural engineering. So I think you can see we have a fantastic panel with a great depths of experience. And so really looking forward to what they have to say. Again, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after the panelists have spoken. Please feel free during the presentations to submit any questions you have in the chat, or once the presentations are over, you can raise your hand and ask in person, and we'll work through those between Michelle and I. Norma Jean, I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you could tell us about the America's Infrastructure Report Card and whatever else you want to share with us.
So Brian, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation. This is a really important topic. It is it has been one of our categories that we assess every 4 years as far as America's infrastructure goes. So let me tell you first, though, a little bit about ASCE. We're an old engineering society, and the oldest started in 1852. We represent approximately 150,000, I think it's a little bit over, so 150,000 civil engineers, primarily in the US, but our international ranks are growing rapidly. So I think we're up to like 207 countries that are also represented in our membership numbers. And a little bit about our ethics and where we sit when it comes to public service. As civil engineers, we hold paramount the health, the safety, and the welfare of the public. So we've been a leading advocate for America's infrastructure for a while, since the 90s. And so a big part of that advocacy is that every 4 years, we prepare this comprehensive report card. It's an assessment of the nation's major infrastructure. And in 2017, it was 16 categories of infrastructure, ports being one of them. We added broadband in this last go round in 2021. I was fortunate enough to be ASCE's president for the 2017 report card debut, and that was a very exciting time for me. As Carrie mentioned, we use that grading system on our categories that most Americans are very, very much aware of, that A, B, C, D, and F grading system. And we use existing data. Thank you to a lot of federal agencies, because we actually use a lot of that data in our assessments that we make. We don't do any of the calculations ourselves. And we also make recommendations as to how we as a country should raise these grades, because although ports are doing pretty good, as a whole, our categories of infrastructure have not fared well in the last several infrastructure report cards. So the reason why we use the grading system is that most people do understand what an A means, and they do understand what an F means. And so it's an easy way for people to grasp how each category is doing. And it's in aggregate form. So even in those categories where they've received a D or a D minus, there are some pieces of infrastructure across the country in that particular category that are A level. It's just that in aggregate, the rest of the category, the rest of that infrastructure is dragging those shining examples down. So as I mentioned, the last report card was released in 2021. And not only do we give grades to each of the categories, we also give an overall grade. And so in 2021, the overall grade was a C minus. So that means that in aggregate, across all of the categories that we make assessments of, our infrastructure is in a mediocre condition. And so the last assessment was prior to the IIJA investments. So I'm really excited about finding out how these investments are going to impact the upcoming report card. So, but the C minus is actually an improvement. So our overall grade, when I was able to personally debut the report card in 2017, was a D plus. And we can't pat ourselves on the back saying, oh, we're moving in the right direction, because we still, in the 21 report card, have about 11 categories still in that D range. So the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, really is going to make a difference in reversing this trend, and I guess I should say accelerating this trend if you look at the increase in the overall grade from 17 to 21. So since we're talking about ports today, let's see how ports did. And ports, along with rail, actually have done fairly well in comparison to the other areas of infrastructure. So in 2021, ports grade was a B minus, which means that overall, a little smidge above average condition, but it's not just condition that we assess. So overall, ports their infrastructure is in good condition, but there is some signs of wear and tear. When we look at assessing and assigning a grade to an infrastructure category, we're looking at several different things, not just condition. So we're looking at the safety, of course, is overall number one in our minds, but also condition. funding, future needs. So if it's good for today, that's not good enough. It needs to be, because our infrastructure is put in place and needs to be able to do its job for today and also for the citizens of tomorrow. So we're looking at future needs also, and also sustainability. So there's several different areas that we look at in order to come up with that specific grade. So the nation has about 300 coastal and inland ports. And as Carrie said, they play a significant part in driving the US economy. I'm going to start really looking at my notes though, because I'm going to start talking about specific data and I just can't memorize everything. So ports support 30.8 million jobs and 26% of the US total GDP. That's 2018 numbers. And we have seen investments in this area. Our friends at AAPA have reported, thank you, Carrie, that ports and port tenants plan to spend $163 billion between 21 and 25, which is $8 billion up from the last 4 years. And I couldn't catch those numbers. You may have already mentioned that earlier in this webinar. So investments are being focused on capacity and efficiency enhancements, because we've seen in the past 20 years, maximum vessel size has increased. In fact, it's doubled. That can be really put a stress on certain ports. And tonnage at the top 25 ports grew from about 4.4% from 2015 to 2019. And I think the projections are that this is going to continue. We'll continue seeing this increase. When you look at inland waterways, and personally, I know a lot more about inland waterways than our deep draft coastal ports. Smaller coastal ports and those inland waterways and their facilities are really a little more stressed. They're challenged to maintain their infrastructure, and they historically have difficulty competing for federal funding just because of their tonnage. So there has been some success. And the success of a port is reliant on infrastructure. And that infrastructure is not just within the port gates themselves, but also in the infrastructure that surrounds the ports. And that's where the grades that aren't so high come into play, because often that infrastructure is congested or in poor condition or both. So for example, 9% of intermodal connector pavement, the portions of roadway that connects a port to other modes, is in good or very good condition. That's just 9%, that's under 10%. On-dock allows for containers to be loaded directly on rail lines that are adjacent to port terminals. So the US Bureau of Transportation Statistics has said that a total of 44 out of the 88, so that's half of the active container vessels at major US ports, have ongoing on-dock rail access in 2019. So that's just half. All major ports either have on-dock rail or they're located close to rail facilities. So in the March 2021 last report card, since I mentioned that it was about 6 months before the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and it was also predated the relief funding that we saw because of the COVID pandemic. So we're interested in seeing how that increase in funding is going to play out. So there's reason for optimism. The IIJA provides $17 billion in investment in inland waterways and ports through various grants and formula programs. Ports are eligible recipients of USDOTD mega grants, MARAD's Ports Infrastructure Development Program, and a few more. So that's good news. And the share of freight funds that can go toward multimodal projects, not just highway projects, has increased in IIJA as compared to the past act. So that's other good news. The IIJA improves multimodal coordination among states. It creates an Office of Multimodal Freight Infrastructure and Policy at USDOT to help implement national multimodal freight policy and to also distribute grants. I know in my home state of Louisiana, the current governor, when he began his tenure, also set a new department and he started a multimodal department. We did not have that before, and we have several deep draft ports that actually play a significant role in moving bulk goods on the Mississippi and its tributaries, as well as container vessels by rail and by highway. Let's see, the funding from the IIJA and other sources don't really close the entire gap, though, because freight programs are among the most oversubscribed according to the USDOT. So according to the USDOT mega program, they'll invest $5 billion through 2026 to help rebuild the United States infrastructure for the benefit of Americans now and for generations to come. The FY22 application cycle specifically has the USDOT receiving applications requesting approximately $30 billion in funding, which far exceeds the $1 billion of funding in the prior year. So our roads still remain congested. Service transportation is also receiving a healthy amount of the IIJ funding. So those funds will probably address some new projects, but also deferred maintenance. But still, it's not going to address the entire deficit. And we're seeing inflationary trends and the supply issues, the supply chain issues seem to have lessened, but still today's dollar is going to buy a certain amount, tomorrow's dollar, not as much. So let's end this on a positive note. Port facilities around the nation are doing incredible things. Two examples of facilities ahead of the curve are with us today. We're going to hear from the Port of Virginia and Port Miami. They're leading by example. They're investing to maintain their competitiveness and to strengthen the U.S. position in the global marketplace. So I have a couple of examples. I hope I'm not taking something that our other two speakers are going to talk about. I hope that they will, in fact, talk a little bit more about them. But an example is that the Port of Virginia is investing $375 million to raise their power stations several feet off the ground and position their data servers as far inland as possible. And this will protect against sea level rise and also increase action of storms. So this proactive investment will save significant money down the line because we are dealing with climate change. Meanwhile, Port Miami received $16 million from the USDOT RAISE grant program to convert its cargo movement chain to a carbon neutral operation. New rail tracks, a new electric gantry cranes and other changes will allow for faster movement of goods with fewer environmental impacts. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our two other speakers. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Brian. And again, thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you, Norma Jean. Fantastic information. I learned a lot more about the report card, and frankly, I didn't realize ports were doing relatively well compared to other parts of the report card. But that's an important point that you also made, is that ports don't live in a vacuum either. So while we may be doing well, we rely on rail and roadways and other infrastructure. So it's all part of the larger marine transportation system. I also appreciate you mentioning the funding availabilities. I just want to make a quick plug for a CMTS publication. We have the Federal Funding Handbook, which is available at cmts.gov. So commend people's attention to that. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Kathy Vick from the Virginia Port Authority. So Kathy, if you could go ahead and enlighten us, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So great to be with you all and really appreciate going through the report card. I really dove into it when I was invited to be on this panel. And I think, Norma, one of the most astute things that you all focus on, which I really appreciate, is that it's not just about port infrastructure. And I think we saw over the last 2 years that the supply chain is called a chain for a reason, right? And so all of that infrastructure outside the gate, whether it's road or rail, the main connectors, whether it's the inland waterways or that road and rail, really are just as important. And so focusing on what we're doing, but also partnering with our departments of transportation and our rail partners to look at what improvements are needed and what we can do as partners to apply for some of those multimodal grants and move things forward is very, very important to the improvement. You know, this focus was how do we raise the grade, right? And I also appreciate that in the report, you all, Norma, give some very specific suggestions. And so what I thought I would do is, and I prepared just a couple of slides because I'm a visual learner. And so for folks who it's easier for them to look at something while I'm talking about it, Michelle, if you can go to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about one of the things. Well, there's 2 or 3 things actually in the recommendations to raise the grade that I think we're doing quite well in Virginia. One is adopting new technologies to reduce the wait times at our docks and boost efficiency. The improvement of resilience and increase in security. That was one specific recommendation. Looking at improving freight and landside connections. So I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then looking at the spending down the harbor maintenance, trust fund on port projects. We're using that for wharf improvements and some dredging that we'll be doing. And so I'll just talk a little bit. I could talk about this for days, just so you all know. So I'm going to be super concise and then hope that you all will ask questions about the things in which you're most excited. So just looking at this $1.4 billion of investment that we're doing here in Virginia. In the left corner there, we are doing a harbor deepening and widening. That's a $450 million project that we're doing in partnership with the Army Corps to go to 55 feet in our inner harbor, 56 feet in our main channel, and 59 feet in our approach channel. Also, we are widening Thimble Shoals west and east. And so we will have 2-way traffic in and out of our port, which will really boost efficiency, but allow those ultra large container vessels that both Norma and Carrie talked about, right, to be able to access us more efficiently. Looking to the right, that's a central rail yard that we are building at our Norfolk International terminals. Norma mentioned a previous project that we did there. We 2.5 years ago upgraded the northern end of that facility to implement semi-automated technology and a reservation system. So that technology and the interface with the land side for truck reservations and being able to groom the stacks at night so that the cargo is ready when the trucks arrive. And it has really facilitated 35-minute turn times in our terminals. So that's almost unheard of. And now we're focusing on the rail. So we're doubling our rail capacity at this facility and adding additional storage tracks that will help with interface with the main road system that's just outside of our terminal to ease congestion from that. And we do have a federal grant that's helping us do that project as well. Looking to the bottom quadrant there, we are now moving to implementing that same technology and infrastructure on the northern side of that same Norfolk terminal. We already did the Portsmouth main container terminal at the same time that we did NIT South. So very aggressive capital portfolio. We have applied for a federal PID grant that hopefully we'll hear about in September that will help with that NIT North project. And then finally, in the right quadrant, we are actually converting one of our terminals to support offshore wind. So when you talk about resilience and decarbonization and support of renewables, we will have a mid-Atlantic hub that will be a marshaling yard and pre-assembly staging area for projects all up and down the East Coast, starting with our coastal Virginia offshore wind project here in Virginia. We've also been able to attract a major component manufacturer to lease part of that terminal so that they'll have that synergy. So incorporating some economic development benefits as well. Michelle, if you can go to the next slide. One of the other things that I really want to focus on is outside the gate. So back to that point that Norma made, right? Like if you look at the intermodal and the paving and the roadways that are outside of our gates, we can move it in 35 minutes to the gate. And then if it can't get anywhere after that, right, we're in big trouble. You can't have that chokehold on the supply chain. So this is just a snapshot really of some of the outside the gate projects here in Virginia, whether it's an interchange outside our inland port to which we run a barge service. So you've got the inland waterway and 95, a major intersection, and rail sort of all converging there at an inland port. We have an inland port in Front Royal, Virginia, where we have our doubling our capacity and doing a grade separation. And we do have a federal grant helping with that. And then just in our main heartland of where our major terminals are, we worked with the local transportation planning organization to prioritize upgrades to the main freight arteries that are outside our gates and really help move freight. And then finally, we worked with the General Assembly this year to require that in local government's comprehensive plans, that they have to consider freight movement in their land use planning and in their transportation plans that are part of their comprehensive plans. Because what we see very frequently is it is a reaction once there is congestion, rather than it being in the planning phase and really forecasting. They forecast passenger congestion, but they don't forecast freight movement, right? And so really layering those together, I think will really help raise the grade, right, in how we approach prioritizing infrastructure funding moving forward. And then I won't do the last slide yet. We'll see if we get questions about it, but I will just mention that we have a very robust decarbonization program. We are targeting 2040 to be net zero. We already have power purchase agreements in place where all of our electricity is sourced from clean energy, nuclear, wind, and solar. And we're very heavily focused on how we continue to adopt new technologies, whether it's hydrogen or all electric, to reduce diesel. And then we're working on scope 3 proposals that help facilitate whether it's over the road trucks being all electric, charging stations, fueling for vessels coming in. We're really starting to work with our partners to see how we can help facilitate their decarbonization, as well as you see more and more of our partners wanting to hit these targets. So that's a very high level, just snapshot of the ways we're trying to contribute to raising this grade and taking the recommendations made in the report very seriously. I will echo Carrie's call to action, not only for the increased funding, but the streamlining of the permitting and being able to put those federal dollars to work. We're often constrained by some of the implementation and regulations that are there. And we can talk about that a little bit more later in the discussion, maybe as part of the questions on really how do we work together to be good partners and to efficiently move these projects forward. So thank you all so much for the opportunity. And I will look forward to hearing what's going on in Miami and then taking some questions.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. Wonderful to see some practical activities that are happening. And I appreciate your highlighting the decarbonization efforts there and how they're incorporated into your investment strategy. So moving along, I'd like to introduce Helga Sommer from Port Miami, and let's hear what's happening down a little further south.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I have a whole bunch of slides, but I'm going to try to go through them as quickly as possible so we have some time for questions after. I kind of want to sum up a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of what our challenges are in terms of raising the grade, and I imagine the same challenges or similar challenges to all of our ports. I'll try to go through what we can do about it, and in some cases what we're already doing about that, and then lastly I wanted to sort of tie up with how our federal and state agencies can help us achieve all of our goals. So, Michelle, if you want to keep moving. Port Miami is a huge economic engine in South Florida. We are recognized as the cruise capital of the world and as the cargo gateway of the Americas. We've made a ton of investments in terms of new infrastructure and growth. And I think that the part of our challenge, and I think a lot of other ports' challenges, is sometimes balancing that with our, maintaining the infrastructure that we already have and making sort of key improvements that are necessary that would be applicable to raising the grade. Keep going. So we'll go through some of these challenges. So insufficient capacity, right? Ports face limitation in terms of berth capacity, container terminal facilities, and overall infrastructure to handle the increasing volume of cargo. Insufficient capacity can lead to congestion, delays, and reduced efficiency. Moving forward, another item would be, another one of our challenges is intermodal connectivity, and this was touched on by our other speakers. The port's connectivity with road and rail networks might be inadequate. So they could be hindering, efficient movement of goods to and from the port. Inadequate infrastructure and congestion on highways and rails can impact the port's ability to handle cargo effectively. A huge one for us and for all of us, deteriorating infrastructure. Aging infrastructure, including shipping channels, piers, wharves, navigation aids, can pose challenges to the port's operations, and regular maintenance and upgrades are necessary to ensure safe, efficient navigation for our vessels. Environmental considerations, which has been touched on, ports need to address sustainability and environmental concerns, such as reducing emissions, minimizing the impact on air and water quality, adapting to climate change, and the failure to address these issues can lead to environmental degradation and potential regulatory challenges. Security and safety. Ensuring the security of ports operations against cyber threats, physical intrusions, and other security risks is crucial. Inadequate security measures can compromise the safety of personnel, vessels, and cargo, leading to disruptions and potential vulnerabilities. Funding and investment, also a common topic. Adequate funding and investment are essential to implement necessary infrastructure improvements. Securing the funding from federal, state, and private sources can be challenging, requiring effective planning, collaboration, and advocacy. These things take time to plan. Stakeholder engagement. Engaging and coordinating with various stakeholders, including federal and state agencies, local communities, our industry partners, is crucial for addressing these concerns, gaining support and aligning our interests. Building consensus amongst diverse stakeholders can be challenging, but it is necessary for successful infrastructure improvements. Regulatory and permitting processes, huge, right? Navigating through a complex regulatory and permitting processes can delay infrastructure projects. Streamlining and expediting these processes while ensuring compliance with environmental and safety regulations are critical for timely infrastructure upgrades. And economic viability. Assessing the economic viability of infrastructure improvements is essential. Ports need to balance the cost and benefits of proposed projects, considering their potential impacts on trade, job creation, and regional economic growth. I think if we effectively address those challenges, our port and all of our ports really can make significant progress in improving the infrastructure grade and enhancing the overall operations and efficiencies of our ports. So how are we doing it? Or trying to? Enhancing port, I'm going to break this down to really 4 categories: operations, sustainability, security, and collaboration. So in enhancing port operations and efficiency, a few different things that we're trying to do: expand and improve container terminal facilities. So that includes increasing berth capacity, upgrading existing berths, developing new container terminals, and implementing advanced cargo handling technologies. All right. The next item in that would really be enhancing intermodal connectivity. So developing efficient rail and road networks, establishing strategic partnerships with rail operators and trucking companies, and improving connectivity to major distribution centers and logistical hubs. This is a lot of the conversation that we were having in terms of how we integrate with efforts that are off the port. This is something that we've been working on with our tunnel that gave us direct access so that we didn't have our container trucks going through the city itself, but also major infrastructure improvements in the area. We've got an $840 million infrastructure improvement project just outside of the port that is tying up traffic now, but should be helping us in the future. Last item, also upgrading navigational infrastructure, deepening and widening our shipping channels, implementing advanced navigation aids and traffic management systems, and enhancing dredging and maintenance operations. The second item, and this is some of the work that we've already done. We've already completed a deep dredge project in our cargo facilities. In 2013, we established our on-dock intermodal rail. 2014, we finished our direct access tunnel. And so we finished a zero emissions ERTG project for one of our cargo yards back in 2021. We're in the process of starting phase 2 for the same cargo yard. And we're planning for similar upgrades in our other cargo yards. And as was mentioned before, we are also in the planning and studying our rail improvements due to us being able to get a $16 million grant for rail improvements to our cargo yards as well. So in our next item, I said I was going to tackle was sustainability and environmental considerations. So implementing eco-friendly practices includes investing in renewable energy sources, reducing emissions and improving air quality, and integrating sustainable water management practices. We're in the middle of a major decarbonization study, and also we're in the middle of what's turning into the largest shore power project in the world. By the end of this year, we'll have shore power for 5 of our cruise terminals. So I know that most of this effort has been concentrating on cargo, but for us, cruise is a major part of our business. And so this is a major step for us in terms of reducing emissions. Another item would be adapting to climate change, assessing vulnerabilities and developing resilience plans, implementing infrastructure upgrades to withstand rising sea levels and extreme weather events, and incorporating nature-based solutions for shoreline protection where that's applicable. We have finished a sea level rise study for port-wide. And we're in the middle of having some workshops and planning efforts to formalize how we're going to plan to implement a lot of the items that came up during that study. Strengthening security and safety enhancements. So that included strengthening cybersecurity measures, implementing robust IT infrastructure and network security protocols, conducting regular vulnerability assessments and audits, and training staff on cybersecurity best practices. That's something that we're dealing with countywide. Enhancing physical security measures, upgrading surveillance systems and access controls, collaborating with law enforcement agencies for enhanced security, and conducting emergency response drills and exercises. And lastly, collaboration and stakeholder engagement. Collaborating with federal and state agencies includes seeking funding opportunities and partnerships, coordinating with Customs and Border Protection for efficient operations, and aligning with federal and state infrastructure initiatives. We're also engaging with local communities and stakeholders by promoting transparency and regular communication, addressing concerns and soliciting feedback, and participating in community development initiatives. So, I want to emphasize the importance of timely implementation of a lot of these recommendations. It is a challenge. These things take a lot of planning and a lot of forethought, really, in terms of how to implement, what steps need to be taken. But their potential long-term benefits for the port and the region and the overall economy are I can't be overstated. So I wanted to wrap this up, sort of tie this in to what we've been talking about, and what Carrie had mentioned at the onset was where we need support from our federal and state agencies. So a few recommendations or asks, really. Funding and grants, no question, right? State and federal agencies can allocate funds and provide grants specifically for port infrastructure improvements. These funds can be used to expand capacity, upgrade facilities, enhance intermodal connectivity, and implement sustainable and resilient infrastructure projects. Streamlined permitting processes, which is at the top of many of our minds, that we need help with agencies to work towards streamlining and expediting the permitting processes for port infrastructure projects. Simplifying regulatory requirements, reducing the bureaucratic red tape that can help ports move forward with the necessary upgrades in a timely manner. Many of our deadlines are commitments to our stakeholders, and so being able to honor those deadlines is really important to us, and sometimes impacts whether we can use grant funding for those projects at all. Technical assistance and expertise. Some of these, the state and federal agencies can offer technical assistance and expertise to ports, providing guidance on best practices, engineering solutions, environmental compliance. Support can help ports navigate the complex challenges and ensure the implementation of high quality infrastructure projects. Collaboration and coordination. Agencies can foster collaboration and coordination amongst different stakeholders involved in port infrastructure, including ports themselves, local communities, industry associations, and environmental groups. It can help align interests, address concerns, and build consensus on infrastructure projects. Research and development. State and federal agencies can invest in research and development initiatives related to port infrastructure. This can include studying innovative technologies, sustainable practices, and climate change adaptation strategies to support ports in implementing cutting-edge solutions. Policy and regulation support. Agencies can develop policies and regulations that incentivize and facilitate infrastructure improvements for ports. It can include providing financial incentives for sustainable infrastructure, setting emission reduction targets, and integrating climate change considerations into planning and development processes. Data sharing and standardization. State and federal agencies can promote data sharing and standardization across ports, can help ports benchmark their performance, identify areas for improvement, and share best practices. Agencies can also develop comprehensive data collection and reporting mechanisms to assess infrastructure conditions and performance consistently. And workforce development and training. Agencies can support workforce development and training programs specific to the port industry, can include providing funding for vocational training, promoting apprenticeship programs, and collaborating with educational institutions to offer courses and certifications that are tailored to port operations and management. And so we feel that, providing these forms of support, the state and federal agencies can significantly contribute to the efforts of ports in addressing challenges and improving their infrastructure grade. Collaboration between the agencies and ports is vital to create the supportive environment for infrastructure improvements that benefit local and national economies. And I know that was a whole ton of information really quick, but thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Helga. That was fantastic. I think you really provide us additional insight and information building on the two previous presenters. I don't want to waste any time. Let's jump into questions from the audience. As noted here, please type questions into the chat box, or if you want to speak up, feel free to raise your hand. I'll start with the first question that we have that appears to be mainly aimed at Norma Jean, but I think others can weigh in. How do sustainability improvements translate to ASCE grades, especially for improvements like shore power that don't inherently move cargo or passengers on their own? These projects have obvious values to the environment and communities, but we're always looking for ways to make the economic case for these improvements as well.
So thank you for that question. Let me make sure I'm off mute. And when we do grade assessment, I had mentioned that it's not just condition, but it's quite a number of things. And sustainability is one of the last things that we actually added in our assessment metrics. And so there is quite a bit of discussion about how a category is doing as far as becoming more sustainable. So that is part of how we assess, make our assessments. Of course, if only one or two actual ports in a whole cadre of the ports, because our grades are really smeared across the category. So we're looking at how all ports are doing from the point of view of sustainability. So that's a good question.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Norma Jean. Question for Kathy. Can you please give an example of where a permitting process for a grant caused delays for implementation of that grant?
Sure. So we've had several where we've been able to go out for bid, be ready, and we're still waiting for a grant agreement to be negotiated. And there is congressional authority for MARAD or the other federal agency to allow us to start prior to the grant agreement being signed at our own risk. But the way they're implementing it is they're not allowing that. They're allowing engineering and design, and they're allowing permitting, but they're not actually allowing us to start construction. Now, they have come back and said, well, we might if all of the environmental work has been signed off on, then maybe as we're negotiating the last pieces of the agreement, we could allow you to move forward. But typically we find that the environmental piece is the one that takes the longest. And I'm not being critical of the agencies. It's important to do that work, but I think they probably need to increase the staff, and they probably need to look at the efficiency of some of the processes in general, where, you know, this piece has to occur and then it can go to this person's desk and then it can go to this person's desk, instead of some concurrent reviews by different parts of the agency so that we can get through things faster. So we are working very hard to establish some meetings in the next few weeks to have further discussions about that, and how can we, so on the state level with our Department of Rail and Public Transportation, from whom we get some grants sometimes to do some rail upgrades, we have a process that's called the letter of no prejudice, where we sort of negotiate a pre-agreement that allows us to start construction and get credit as part of our cost share at our own risk. And it has certain parameters of things that we have to do, like reporting during that interim period, to make sure that we're in compliance with everything that will be in the full grant agreement. And so we're going to propose that perhaps MARAD in particular, oversees the ports when we implement the PID grants and some of the infra and raise grants. Could we implement something like that and have sort of a standard no prejudice agreement that allows construction to start? Because I think, with the influx of all these additional infrastructure funds, we're going to see this become more and more of a problem. And, I think Helga made the point, there are times when we are having to evaluate, can we even afford to apply for the grant because of how long? I mean, we're talking, you get notice of award and it's a year to 18 months before you have a grant agreement. Like if we have designed the project enough to submit the grant application, we're ready to do the project. We don't have 18 months to wait to do the project because of the paperwork. And so we've just got to work together to find a solution to that so that we can keep these projects moving.
Great. Thanks for that, Kathy. Another question from the chat here. When making changes at ports, long-term contracts with terminal operators are often described as a limiting factor to instituting change. Can you describe examples in contract changes with terminal operators and how implementing these contract changes can help improve port operations?
So Helga, I don't know if you all are a landlord port, but we're not. So I can't really opine on that.
We are, and I agree. I think that it can be a limiting factor, but I think that partnership becomes really important. What ends up happening is, for example, we've got some of our cargo yards that have been quicker than others to want to upgrade to an ERTG system. And so it really takes an investment on both sides, both financially. I mean, that has been a financial partnership between the port, between our stakeholders and with our granting agencies. But it's also, it's sort of everybody having to take a deep breath and having to stomach the disruption to their cargo yard. So it takes planning in terms of phasing, and it takes that sort of initiative where the cargo yards, it can be an incredible improvement to their operation. But there's some growing pains along the way that really need to be carefully negotiated and planned for. So we have been moving forward with those kinds of projects. Like I said, we've got a few ERTG projects, and now, of course, there's more upgrades to our rail system as well.
Great. Thanks for that. Unfortunately, that's about all the time we have for today. I'm really sorry because we had some really meaty questions there, and I actually had written down half a dozen questions myself. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody for your participation, particularly the panelists. Thank you, of course, to AAPA, Carrie, thanks for being here, and to ASCE for co-sponsoring this. Again, the recording of this can be found at the CMTS website, www.cmts.gov. And actually, Carrie, if you want to make a final comment, I'll go ahead and let you there. I see you pop your camera on.
Conversations like this that further the ability of the seaport industry to tell its story to policymakers. Thank you to the service of all the public official here. Thank you to all my colleagues from the port industry. This is awesome.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks again to all of our panelists for this. And everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. So long. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.